All right, perfect. Now I just want to make sure if someone can just give a thumbs up that you can see the presentation screen and not the notes screen. I always get paranoid. The wrong one is on the screen. Oh yeah, perfect. Thanks, Bonnie. All right. So first off, thanks for coming here today. As I mentioned before, we scheduled this far ahead of the schedule. So originally, when we scheduled this, I was still the oh, I can't even remember my old title now. I was the communications and marketing specialist. As many of you probably know, with Karen Henders departing this summer for her retirement, her role kind of got split, not exactly in half, but into two different roles. So Lorna Sandberg has taken over the donor services side of Karen's duties, and I've taken over more of the community leadership, community impact, grant making, the vital signs research, and the charity networking side of things. So that's where I'll now be your host for the future VSCN meetings as well as this one. And actually, before we even go into this, I'll just let you know that we are going to be looking at hopefully bringing things back in person a little bit next year. So, but we'll figure those plans out. We can talk a bit more about that for the end of the meeting. All right. So the topic I want to talk to you a bit about today is branding and storytelling. So I've prepared a presentation called The Power of Branding and Storytelling. And for those of you who might maybe want to know a little bit more about my background, so I spent about 12 years in different marketing and communication roles before coming to the nonprofit sector. And those roles really ranged from when I was young. I started out doing print and web design for a small firm here. And then, sorry, I'm also just letting some people in during this. And then kind of as things went, it went from working at a small firm to then freelancing for a lot of ad agencies around Regina. And then I ended up in a role where I was doing some fun things where I really dipped into working on branding, working on specialty design, like experiential marketing. So like SaskTel's trailer that they used to take out to events, things like that. Working on virtual reality, augmented reality, all sorts of wild, crazy things for captive audience at the time. And then I went from there and I spent about 3 years at Brand Communications Group, where I served the majority of my time there as their creative director. And as their creative director, I oversaw the creative department and the creative campaigns that we were doing for a wide variety of clients. So a lot of government ministries and crowns, so like Sask Power, Sask Energy. At one point, SaskTel, kind of a little bit before my time as creative director, City of Regina, Access Communications, Ministry of Highways, Ministry of Health, all sorts of kind of bigger initiatives. And one of the things that I was really lucky to get to be involved with there is a few branding workshops that we did, specifically with Sask Energy would have been, I think, the last one I would have worked on, if I remember correctly. So I want to take you through a little bit about from my experience and my learnings and some of the things that really I used to do there, but have adapted in ways that we've used here at SSCF, and I've done as a freelancer outside of SSCF in the past to bring to life, what is a brand? What's the purpose of a brand? How do you define a brand? How can that be impactful to your organization? A lot of this stuff really, it's universal, whether you're a for-profit or non-profit, as far as the fundamentals. The messaging and the way you go about it is where it might change a bit when we're looking at the charitable sector. So without kind of rambling too much more, I'll get right into the presentation. So before we go too far into anything, I just want to focus on defining what is a brand. And I'd like to start by actually talking about what a brand is not. So it's not simply your logo, it's not simply your tagline, it's not just your key messages or your mission statement. It's not your colors. It's not even your name. it's not your website or your marketing materials, and it's not your social media persona. What all of these things are, as well as many other elements, is these are all of the elements of your brand. These are kind of the outward facing things that happen on the surface of a brand that exists underneath, more as a framework, as a structure that powers what these things are going to look like and the language that they're going to hold. Branding is about discovering who you are and realizing who others believe you are. So really what I mean there is a brand is going to be, the word I like to use is like essence or persona. It's about discovering who your organization would be if it were a human. You know, how does your organization act? How does your organization dress? How does it make people feel? What's the attitude that it brings towards public? Those are sort of the drivers of a brand that are going to bring it to life. And then another important aspect is realizing who others believe you are and making sure that aligns with the perspective you might have internally of what you are. So just an example of that is, you know, if you're a charity working in food security, you might say you're a very caring organization, and probably should be. But if you're an organization that's maybe understaffed, or, you know, and people are burnt out and people aren't able to give that sort of personal attention and care to servants or to the people that you're serving, then they might not actually see you as that caring person or that caring organization that you may be intended to be. So a big part of it is understanding who you are, and a lot of it's like who you want to be, and also reinforcing to make sure that you're living up to that promise, and other people are feeling that brand. One example of a brand I like to refer to is Nike, just as kind of a base brand that I think most people will be able to recognize and understand. And what makes up their brand is very, I think, simple to see once you start seeing it from the right lens. So I think a lot of people, if you were to say, okay, well, what is Nike's branding? This logo is probably what a lot of people might say off the top. But the reality is this logo doesn't really mean anything without a brand. This logo is just a symbol, and it has no power unless there's an essence behind it. There's a message behind it. And that message behind it is what they're actually using to make this logo mean something. I don't know if many of you remember this. I just have some notes because I don't remember it well anymore. But back in 2016, there was an NFL player named Colin Kaepernick, who you're seeing on the screen. And he was essentially ostracized from the league and criticized and couldn't get back on the team after he started kneeling for the national anthem as a form of peaceful protest against police brutality and racial inequality in the United States. Became a giant thing. It became something that he became the symbol for, and was kind of willing to sacrifice his entire career, his entire reputation as a football player in order to stand up for, or literally kneel down for in this case. So what Nike did, being the corporation they are, is they took his cause and they immediately turned it into a marketing campaign as fast as they could. So they came out with this ad that simply said, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, to show that personality that Colin was doing with his act of defiance, and tying it to, this is actually the essence of our brand. This is what our brand stands for. This is what we're trying to tell people that want to interact with Nike. This is how they should feel when they're with Nike. This is the attitude that we bring to people and want people to exude. And the reality is Nike's selling clothes, but an ad like this, you don't even see clothes, you just see the personality. And that's why I like using it as an example, because it's a strong way of just showing the brand itself. And then you see some of these personality traits that they have, which are things like defiance, kind of defying the odds, I guess, standing for something bigger than yourself, trying to dream, trying to achieve the impossible, trying to challenge yourself to become better, stronger, come through their wording and their language. So simply having ads like, let's say, fearless, stop dreaming, start working, your only limit is you. You see all of these messages that, again, exude all they're exuding is personality. You're barely seeing athletic wear on these ads, if you even are at all, even though that's actually what they're meaning to sell you. The clothes isn't what's important. Everybody's selling athletic wear that fits pretty much the exact same, but they're trying to build it, that cool style, that attitude behind it that their audience can wear. And then when we talk about the idea that the brand isn't just what you say it is, which is kind of everything we've shown up to this part, it's also what people believe it is. So this is where, in their case, you can see the influencers that promote Nike and care about Nike and love wearing Nike, or the athletes who are sponsored and represent Nike, and then just everyday fans of Nike, I guess, for a lack of a better word, all are trying to create that lifestyle out of the brand. And again, that lifestyle isn't exuded through just their logo or a color palette. It's exuded through that personality that they have living beneath it that guides how things are going to look, how they're going to speak, what they're going to put on an ad, which athletes they're going to decide to partner with, things like that. So really, it's about Nike's essence, which their essence is about being a bit of an outlaw, about, again, trying to defy what's possible, trying to break through walls in the sense of both athleticism and with Colin Kaepernick's message of societal norms as well. So one of the questions to think about when you think about your own organization is, what is the essence of your organization? Do you understand the essence already? And if you don't, how do you start to think about those things? So, for example, we're all in the charitable sector here. So a word that's probably pretty universal is being a caring organization, caring for people. And what kind of personality traits exude that caring nature? Are you warm? Are you calming? Are you comfortable? Are you welcoming? If you are those things as an organization, or an organization's purpose, then also, okay, well, what kind of language would we use to show that? How do we actually start to show that visually? How do we make sure that our key messages, that our key services are all living up to this essence, and start to build your brand really from there, or your visuals of your brand, your language from there. So that's all very abstract to think about at the moment. So I will take you through a little bit of just the process that we would have done at SSCF to help define our own brand as well. And on that note, how do you define your brand? There are many ways. One thing I'll let you know that we did here at SSCF, pretty much like when I started, which was back in August 2020, was start to look at our own brand as SSCF and help define, who are we, what do we do, and how do we show that. And what I witnessed when I started at SSCF is that there was a lot of bits and pieces everywhere. I found, for example, we had a logo, we had 2 colors identified, we had a lot of sheets of different key messages that we can use, value propositions that we bring. There was a lot of these kind of bits and pieces scattered of the things that we do and the things that we have, and none of them were really connected. So what I did was I talked to Donna at the time, and I just let her know, like, okay, well, we have these elements, but we're missing so much more behind it, and we actually don't know if what we're doing is the right thing. So I convinced her to let me, well, I don't even know if I had to convince her, but I talked to her about letting me run the staff and board through a branding exercise. And what I did was I took kind of the idea of what I would have been part of at a place like Brown with a large company like Sask Energy. And I thought, well, how can we just turn that into a really small, compact thing that our staff and board can do in a day? So what we did do is we went through a number of exercises in order to identify 2 things. One is our brand framework, which I'll talk a bit more about what this is, as well as our brand persona, or the archetypes, the personality that our brand should be modeled after or follow in order to be easy to understand for people. And what we did was we took, again, all of our staff and then some participating board members through a wide variety of kind of creative sessions throughout a day. So one was a simple image board where we had a whole folder of different photos. And what we did was I got each member to say, okay, pick some of these photos that represent SSCF to you and explain to me why. So for just example, it's just like random photos. You could have a picture of a penguin, you could have a picture of a pizza, you could have cogs, you could have just whatever you have, and people just abstractly think of why does this represent. So for example, someone might choose, a picture of someone holding hands because it means that we're like taking care of each other, that sort of thing. So you go through with everybody, you start to understand at the most base level, what is the abstract feeling that people are getting from SSCF, from those of us internally who kind of live and breathe it every day. We also then took that as a way to kind of open our minds and then go through some of the exercises of figuring out what you see on screen, which is what we call our brand framework. And this is really kind of that foundational piece that nobody outward sees, but it's what guides SSCF's brand and the essence of our brand and how we feel and speak and what we're trying to do. So through a lot of exercises, or a few exercises to bring this to life too, and some word searching, we had kind of a bunch of potential personality traits, got everybody to choose. We started to figure out, okay, well, why did you choose these ones? How do we condense this into something just really succinct, kind of nothing more than 4 or 5 words per section, and then start to build a character out of that, if that makes sense. So in our case, when we were all said and done, the personality traits we linked to SSCF as being, we're reliable. And one thing that, sorry, I'll note is that all of these, we have a longer one sheet that actually describes. So when we say reliable, we have some bullet points. It's like what we specifically mean by that, but this is kind of like a cheat sheet. So we want to say, we should be reliable. We should be reliable to the charities that depend on us, and we should be reliable to the donors that are trusting their money in us. We want to be a helpful expert. We want to have educational opportunities, kind of like this. When somebody reaches out to us with a problem applying to a grant, we want to be quick at answering. If our website is a mess and it's impossible to apply to a grant, that means we want to actually go in there and change it and make it better. We want to be helpful. We want to make sure that we're leading the path as much as we can. We're a pathfinder, so in our case, that means we help people discover the routes that they can go. From a charity standpoint, that might be through things like the vital signs research and making sure that the community needs that are most pressing in our community are well defined. From a donor standpoint, that could mean helping a donor figuring out the right funding option and the right donor options for them in order to support their community. And so on and so forth. I won't go through every single point, but that's kind of the idea of what we're thinking of behind those and the conversations we're having. Our advantages are very straightforward. Just what are some of the very basic things that we know are advantages of SSCF that won't change or likely won't change. And then our promise is kind of like an internal slogan. It's not something that we would use outward facing, but it's something that we work together to come up with. When you come into work at SSCF every day, what's the one statement that no matter what you're doing, you're working towards, and everybody's work is working towards, whether it's updating the website or preparing the newsletter or sending out donor thank yous. And what we came up with for us is that we're trying to innovate and empower donors and charities to build stronger communities together. So the idea is if we're doing something that doesn't match that promise statement in some way, shape, or form, perhaps it's not the right thing we should do. On the other hand is if we evolve and we start to do a lot more services, then perhaps we need to revise this promise statement and make sure that the structure is there. So that helps build a little bit for us from when we come in and work every day. This is what's important aspect of the foundation. The second and very important part, and I think this is a little bit more of what drives the communications. And this is actually something that I would recommend any charity can look up and do. And I'll find, actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll even just send out after this with the slides, a couple of websites that have resources to these archetypes. And what this is, the brand archetypes are the different personas that a brand can be. And it's really modeled after characters and stories. And the idea is that you have these 12 different character types, and every single character in some sort of, in every story can be identified as one of these, and they're universally known. So if your brand is trying to exude itself as a person, that it's going to be one of these people. And if it is well defined as one of those people, it's going to be a lot easier for people, for your audiences to understand who you are and what you stand for. So I'm just gonna, I'll explain just a few of these, and then I'll show you the ones that we landed on for SSCF. So for example, you've got like the sage, which would be the wise old man. That's kind of the person that brings knowledge and understanding that you feel comfortable and trust with. In movies or in storytelling, like the wizard Gandalf in Lord of the Rings would be a good example of a sage. Or I guess this has evolved now, but in the original like Star Wars movie from way back, the episode 4, it would have been Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was kind of the old wise guiding man that guides the main character. One like the outlaw, that would be one that Nike would fall under, and that's the person who's always kind of, when everyone's zigging, they're the ones trying to zag. They're always the ones trying to push the boundaries, to be free, be themselves. The magician, that would be, well, from a company standpoint, Apple would be a good example of a magician, where they're constantly trying to invent something brand new, kind of out of nothing, is the view of it. The hero, I think, should be pretty straightforward. It's that person that's trying to save the day. The lover is something that you might see in a lot of brands pertaining to to makeup, for example, or I'm trying to think of the right example for that. That's okay. And there's a lot. And then like caregiver, that's one that would actually be really probably pertinent to most nonprofits. And the caregiver is that idea of somebody that, again, it's kind of that maternal figure, that person that brings warmth, that someone can trust, that's nurturing, that's making sure people are fed. Nonprofits in general, most charities will probably fall into the category of caregiver in some way, shape, or form. With SSCF, when we started this exercise and we started looking at the archetypes, I think a lot of the staff and board initially thought, well, we're the caregiver here because we work in the charitable sector. But as we started to talk through things, and as we actually explored what each of the archetypes stands for and their purpose, we came to a different realization, which was they realized, well, we're not actually the ones kind of with the boots on the ground doing that nurturing work. What we're doing is we're the facilitator, and we're connecting the donors, we're connecting the charities, and we're really the middle person, making sure that the charities can be the caregiver and the nurturer, and that the donors are taken care of. So what we realize is that we're more of knowledge keepers and knowledge sharers than anything, and that the sage made most sense as a character to try to model SSCF after. So you'll notice if you start to kind of dissect everything we do, this is primarily where we try to come at. And I'll just read a bit about what the sage is here. So in this case, this archetype broken down as the sage is a seeker of truth, knowledge, and wisdom. Their drive comes from the desire not only to understand the world, but then to share that understanding with others. We're lifelong learners and enjoy expressing the knowledge with philosophical conversations. We're more likely to pass on their wisdom to someone who can use it or change the world rather than change the world themselves. So that's where we realize it's like, well, that's really what we're trying to do when it comes to something like the Vital Signs Community Network or Vital Signs Research, or funding grantees and giving resources to help that. Is that we really are the middle person. So it was nice because going through that exercise helped our organization realize that and start to shift focus a little bit of, okay, well then now this gives a new light on how we're actually going to approach the language we use and the types of materials we're developing and everything from there. And then in our case too, we also did identify a secondary archetype. And I'll just very briefly go through this. One of the things I had brought up about the sage is that the sage is that kind of that wisdom, but sometimes it can come up as cold. And what we're still doing, we wanted to have an optimistic light to, and what the innocent is a voice of optimism and being honest and being humble, showing happiness, showing simplicity, showing positivity. And those were all the things that were important to us as well, and that maybe reflected a little more of what we thought we were doing when we thought we were a caregiver, if that makes sense. So then with these pieces, and after kind of hours and hours of doing some work to get to something that is now very succinct, we understood our personality traits, we understood how we should speak, the emotions that SSCF should portray, the types of messages we should be delivering, what we work towards every day, and ultimately all of this becomes the purpose of our brand. And then once we have this purpose, now we can start to look at, okay, well, how do we actually show this to the world in a meaningful way? So there's a lot of things, I'm just going to run through some of them. So we start to define our visuals. So as I mentioned at the beginning, all we did is we had kind of 2 shades of green, and they just existed from our logo for whatever reason. What this did is allowed us to actually go and now choose a richer palette of colors that has a little more meaning. So just for your knowledge, kind of the psychology behind it is that earthy tones like the greens, the grays, the blues, more of the calmer colors are things that align with the sage. It's things that make you feel calm, things that make you feel warm, things that are maybe more trusted. But then because we have the innocent and that happiness and positivity, we wanted to make sure we didn't lose all that brightness for just all these kind of gray, earthy tones. And that's where we brought in some of the brighter, more positive colors like the yellows, the pinks, as well as keeping the light green that we had before. So you'll notice that for the majority of things you'll see from SSCF, it's kind of greens and grays with these pops of brighter color. And that's on purpose based on what we're trying to do visually. We also looked at the type of photography we wanted to use based on who we are. So knowing we want to have that bright positive aspect, but also make sure we come off as professional, we looked at ways of how we can make sure that that bright positivity comes through when we're showing photography of the region of South Saskatchewan. Make sure that when we are showing people, it's all about kind of what's the outcome of what we're trying to achieve with the donors and charities, as we're trying to make a happier, better, more positive place for people. So showing people always with big smiles on their face, exuding love, exuding that positivity kind of from the innocent archetype again. And then there's also defining in the bottom right there that even when we're looking at a professional sense and we're trying to do professional photography, that we want to try to make sure those images still have that happiness and positivity within them, even within that quote unquote kind of corporate sense. And then we started to take all of those things like the colors and some aspects that we defined. We also looked into like what fonts we were going to use and things like that, and then made some examples of, okay, well, this is what our materials can start to look like. And there's more examples in this, but this just gives you an idea of some of the things that we created from all the elements to make sure that we have some guidelines to work with. And all of that lives within, in this case, we call it the visual identity guidelines. So we have our brand framework, kind of sheet that goes through the framework and all those terms and what they mean. And then beside it, we also have these visual identity guidelines, which is the visuals that come out of that brand framework. And we'll have time to talk more about this closer to the end of the meeting, just so you know, when I can't see everyone right now, so I don't want to stop to put hands up, but that kind of is the general aspect of the brand structure itself and what we've done for SSCF. It's pretty, I think it's important, especially if you're not an organization that has a, for example, like a national backing, like the YMCA or YWCA would have more of a national network. But if you're just a very like grassroots local organization, it can be really easy to miss this part. But without this part, even in some basic sense, it can be really hard to let the community know your purpose and get them to understand it in a meaningful way. I just want to move on now a bit to talk about storytelling within your brand or within your organization. So I don't think this is a revelation, but telling your story and the stories that happen kind of within your walls will strengthen your brand and will make a stronger view of yourself for your audiences, for your stakeholders. So some of the things to think about is, what is your story? And if I want to follow this up from the branding aspect is, understanding your essence of what your purpose is. So for example, I'll just keep going on with SSCF is, SSCF connects donors to charities in order to create community impact. In the shortest way that I can kind of say off the top of my head, that's what SSCF story is. How does your organization make people feel? So how do the people you're serving feel? How do the donors that give to you feel? What's that overall emotion you're trying to have people leave your doors with? So again, with SSCF, I think a sense of trust, confidence, and comfort would probably be things that we would hope people are coming. We don't want a donor to come here and leave thinking that, well, that was chaotic and they have no idea what they're doing. Same thing from a charity. If you're getting a grant letter from us or getting funds, you don't want the process to be stressful or confusing or anything like that. So that's just a basic example. When people think about your organization, what do they say? This is actually something I forgot to mention beforehand with the branding, so I'll mention it here. Is one of the other things we did, and I'm sure probably some of you here would have participated in this, is we did send out a survey regarding SSCF's brand and their perception. I think it was back in the beginning of 2021 that we also used along with that work that our internal staff and board did to make sure that what people are saying about us also aligning with what we think we're trying to do. And in our case, it actually did align pretty well. So that aspect was really important to make sure that we understood that people we work with think that we should be doing this too, or think that this is our purpose as well. And that just helps you identify, are there any red flags? So I don't know if many of you will know right away, like what people are talking about behind your back, essentially, is kind of the idea there, is what do people say about your organization when they're just out in public talking to anybody. And if you don't have that, then that's something that could be important to try to figure out even just through simple stakeholder surveys. Yeah, just really anything simple to have a basic gauge. I want to take you through a little case study that shows how one company went about kind of figuring out what do people think about them and also actively work to change their perceptions and in a really interesting way, make people kind of self-realize the brand that this company was trying to create. So I doubt that we will be familiar with this. I know I wasn't, but this is a case study that back when I was at Brown, I had actually researched. So there's a grocery store chain in the UK and I'm sure other places in the world called Lidl. And the idea of this brand is it's kind of like the equivalent of what you would think of a No Frills or Giant Tiger here. It's discount groceries. It's known for being kind of the cheapest prices, but not necessarily the best quality, or at least that was the perception. But what Lidl did, this would have been, I want to say within the last decade, around 10 years ago, was that they wanted to actually prove to public that not only do we have the cheapest groceries that you can get, but we're actually extremely high quality. And the way they got people to do that was really interesting. So they had the benefit of it being food, and food is something that's really easy to experience, and you just taste it and you know whether it's good or bad right away. So what they did was they set up these kind of, well, they're supposed to be farmers market stands at actual farmers markets in the UK. And then they sold their food as if it was coming kind of like straight from the farm. And then after somebody had taste tested it, really enjoyed it, loved it, were ready to buy, then they would reveal that it was actually everything here was from their little supermarket. And then what they would see is the people's kind of surprise of like, oh, like I always thought that this place like had terrible food, had terrible choices, didn't have good produce, that sort of thing. And to let them realize by their own actions, by going in and just tasting it and enjoying it and experiencing it in their own way, that then they came to that realization that, oh, this is actually a place of high quality that I would love to shop. And because they thought of that themselves, then they're more likely to actually share that message and return. But if this is just little, just putting out a bunch of billboards that say, hey, our groceries taste great, nobody's going to listen to that didn't already walk in their doors. Very few people are going to be willing to just trust them on that. They're much more willing to trust themselves on the experience they just had. I'm going to show a video here, and it doesn't have any audio, unfortunately, but so it's only 30 seconds, but I think visually you can see like the expressions on people's faces. So what they did was they did these markets and then a series of ads where the ads are simply setting up the markets, getting people through the process of buying the food, and then seeing kind of the surprise and excitement on their faces as it's revealed to them that they're eating a product from Lidl. And yeah, I couldn't get the audio to work the way my computer's set up, so just bear with me as I pull this up and just watch the visual of it for a little bit. There we go. So first, it's people taste testing as if they think it's just a fresh farm outside of their town sort of deal. And then there's people committing because they enjoy what they had, and then they get that surprise of actually all of this is from Lidl. You see the big smiles on people's faces. And they had a whole series of that they ran as ads. So that the thing that was really clever about what they did with that, and I'm just going to pull my presentation back up here. The thing that's really clever about what they did with that is that you can see that genuine, authentic moment of self-realization. But from their ad perspective, that person's self-realization is also the ad, and that is their 5-star review, essentially. It's like their equivalent of a Google review becomes the ad itself. And they really took it further than that, and they made sure that this brand and their message was brought to life through peer-to-peer storytelling as much as possible. And that peer-to-peer aspect of storytelling can be huge when it comes to, in this case, it is the grocery store, but this is very true for nonprofits and charities, is that kind of the testimonies of the people that are benefiting from a service are the ones that are going to sell your message the best. This I'm just going to run you through because it's a really interesting way that they did the rest of the marketing campaign around this. Is they used this all under the hashtag little surprises. What they did was they started to share kind of the great food and the great prices on Twitter using this hashtag, and then other people started to submit their own tweets as well. So then tweets themselves with people giving their own really short testimonial became all of the ads they were doing. So a billboard was literally a tweet of someone telling you, you've got to buy this because it's delicious and cheap. And then they used that as posters, poster ads that they'd have in stores as well as public-facing advertising. And then the hashtag little surprises is something for them on their Twitter that really went viral, and people started to use it. There was thousands and thousands of people using this hashtag for years. I don't know if it still is at this point, but it really helped them redefine what their brand was and get them out of that space of being viewed as that value, cheap, but low quality product, to the tagline that they were trying to convince people of, which is big on quality, little on price. But much like that logo with Nike, even this tagline on its own, without any of that work they did, without creating that essence of their brand, without creating that experience and that feeling that people were feeling, this message doesn't really mean anything to many people. It's just empty words that a corporation is trying to sell them. But instead, what they ended up doing is they created an environment where it's just peer-to-peer sharing, and it's the customer giving all of the messaging. It's the customer telling you that this was really high quality and it was that tiny price. And that sort of mentality, that peer-to-peer sharing, and any opportunity when your organization is able to get somebody to really put themselves in the shoes, to experience something themselves, they're way more likely to become not only kind of, I guess we don't sell things at nonprofits, but buyers of your cause and in your cause and advocates of your cause, if they're able to experience it and understand the impacts, the outcomes that you're trying to come to. I'll talk a little bit about these potential charity ideas, but even before that, just some good examples when we talk about that experience that I can even just think of offhand, that I think a lot of people would be familiar with here in, at least in Regina for sure, is like the YWCA has their Walk a Mile in Her Shoes campaign, which is in a lot of ways using that same idea of inviting people in and making them experience something. And then once they've experienced that, even though they're not experiencing like the direct thing, they're still going through an experience with the shoes and then getting the messaging and absorbing the messaging around domestic violence and abuse and the need for the different services that the Y has. And through that process of their experience, they're becoming an advocate through their own self-realization. And those people are more and more likely to then, for one, understand the purpose of what the charity is trying to do, but also in everyday life, be more likely to be excited to talk about that charity if it comes up in a conversation, or have a base understanding, or talk about their experience and then go into, yeah, I did this, my feet hurt, and then talk a bit more about the actual messages they learned as well. The other one, there was another good one that I had thought of and I didn't write it down. I can't remember now. I'll see if it comes to me. So I guess from SSCF's standpoint, and one of the things with charities in general, and I know this is very true because when I was at Brown Communications Group, you're working with like Crown Corporation budgets, which are very big. So you have a lot of room to start creating these experiences or putting into campaigns that are going to have wide reach. I know the reality in the nonprofit world is you don't have this massive marketing budget. It's true of us here as well. So then a challenge also becomes, okay, well, Little made all these TV ads, and they probably had 1 million of them, and even the cost to set up those markets would have been, out of scope for a lot of people. So how do you do this on a budget? And I think that's where more of the potential charity ideas that I wanted to think of are important. So I'll just shoot you through some of the things that SSCF is doing, and then we'll open it up to kind of questions, discussion. We can even just brainstorm if anyone has any ideas for themselves. But in our case, that peer-to-peer sharing is something that we're constantly trying to figure out ways to do. One of the new ways that we do that is we have a podcast that we launched this summer where we try to share stories with different donors, different charities, different community impact initiatives around our region. We also share just like charity stories of grants that were received from us. So we'll go through and we'll find, someone from our, let's say our Vital Community Fund grant that we just thought, okay, we haven't talked about this topic in a while. So let's see if maybe they want to share a story about what they did with the grant money and create the impact story that way. The thing that's nice about that is that, again, it's not just SSCF saying, oh, we give money out and grants are impactful. It's a testimonial from someone else that's saying, we received this money and this is the outcomes that we saw, and these are the people that were impacted, and we're grateful for the opportunity for this to happen. Same with the donor stories. We try to share donor stories. I think one actually went up today about Saros Kowalski and his small animal fund regarding a story that we captured about him. And just trying to create those aspects with these stories too, where it's not just us sharing them, but there's a good chance if we share something about, I'll pick on Big Brothers Big Sisters. If we share a Big Brothers Big Sisters story, then they're more likely to also take that story and share it on their network. So it helps also amplify the messaging through what you see at the end, kind of cross promotion and finding ways that multiple people can share a good news message around our sector. Creating experiences, I talked a bit about that with what the YWCA would do with the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event as one example. One thing that's big is bringing your stories to life through simple video messages, especially if you're utilizing social media, is very, I'd say, unintimidating, undaunting, and manageable, and also the most effective way to do it. So for example, we have some, well, I'll give you an example of 2 videos we have at SSCF and how each of them perform. So one of the things we started doing when I started was just doing some thank you videos from staff and from Donna, and some executive director updates from Donna. Specifically, we did one around like the impact at the end of 2021, or we did one a year after, like for the anniversary of COVID, to talk a bit about the emergency response funds that we had, and just thank the community for their efforts. And those videos are filmed either on a phone with no equipment, or the one was just over Zoom. I just recorded all of our staff saying thank you over Zoom. And those videos on social media widely outperformed the actual like professionally produced testimonial ads that we also have run beside them. So we have some that we spent like real money on to get so we could have TV commercials, and we'll also run those on our social media channels, and they're very highly produced, very polished, look like an ad. And the reality is, when people are going to social media, they're not going to look for ads, they're going to look for real raw messages from their peers. So when you have that, for lack of a better word, kind of crappy phone video, people are actually way more likely to draw their eyes to it and want to watch it and to buy into it and to empathize with it, because it just feels like what you expect to see on social media, and it just feels very down to earth, and it's very easy. So that's one thing that I would just mention to really any charities. If you ever have even just a simple, if you have a staff member or say a parent of someone who received services that just has a good message, just see if they're willing to, hey, will you record this as a quick video with us just over the phone, and we'll just as something you can share. Or if they don't like video, even an audio file would work best. And if an audio file doesn't work best, then even just the visual of a testimonial is something that works really well. I'm sure some of us will follow some realtors, for example, on Facebook, and you'll notice realtors are constantly sharing literally just an image of a testimonial from a customer. So if you treat it the same way, if you're doing an image of a testimonial from a patron of your organization, just little things like that are ways to build your brand, build your message, to build buy-in and understanding of what you do in ways that aren't too wild or too out of scope, working on what's probably a smaller budget for your nonprofit. That's pretty much what I prepared. I just wanted to give people a bit of an insight in what a simple branding process can look like, what's important about it, how we went from just having a simple logo in 2 colors to having something that actually means something. And then now that we have something that means something, we can use these different ways to bring that story to life in ways that match our personality. So I'm gonna stop it there. And if anybody has any kind of questions or comments, just feel free to either put something in the chat or put your hand up if you'd like to say it aloud, and then I'll just respond. And if you need to know how to put your hand up at the bottom under reactions, just hit raise hand. Yes.
I can jump in if you want. I think you were going to call on me, Victor. I'm not sure.
Yes, I was.
I was like, oh, we're talking into all the distances. So I thought I'd put on my camera first. Thank you for that presentation today. This is my first time attending one of these group calls, so I was pleased to be here, and it reminded me of a lot of the really great things and work we can do with brand. Mostly, I just wanted to say thank you for that last reminder about the video and the stories, and how they don't always have to be so produced. And I know personally that's a challenge I've had in my own fundraising career. Is like, oh, we always want it to be perfect. We want it to be better. We want it to look great. But the most authentic stories are sometimes a little rough around the edges. And so yeah, just a good reminder for myself as I go into the year-end philanthropy part. So thanks.
No problem. And yeah, even just to add to that, yeah, as I mentioned, like it's almost a blessing with social media that people expect things to look like just someone use their phone to do it because everyone has a phone. So the reality is you should probably, in my opinion, there's a good chance that you should probably just be using your phone or any random phone to record or take the photos that you want to share. When it comes to a social media aspect, is at least. But to be honest, even when it comes to if you were in a position that you're going to have like a TV ad or a well-produced video ad, like that little campaign is even a good idea, like a good example of even that produced ad of their market was still something that just felt very raw. It felt very real. It didn't feel overly branded. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that those authentic messages can resonate really well when it comes to even like a corporation. When it comes to nonprofits, I think it's what's expected is boots on the ground work, really raw, insightful. And again, also, to be honest, budget conscious, because from a nonprofit view, you also, even if it didn't cost a lot, even if it was gifted, people start to wonder, it's like, well, how can you have like 20 high produced videos? Isn't there better ways you could be using my funds as a donor? Is like a potential risk as well. So there's a few reasons for that, but the main one really is that people just genuinely are more gravitated towards things that look raw and authentic and not overly produced online. So I'll just give a few more seconds to see if anybody else wants to. Oh, perfect.
Victor,
Shauna.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you're good to go, Shauna.
Okay. Victor, I was just wondering if you have any guidance or suggestion about the length of those videos that you're doing. We're in the middle of our capital campaign launch. And so one of the things we do have it's about a 6-minute promotional video that was professionally produced, donated by the company that produced it, as well as a business person here in the city. But we're also doing some of those little short clips. And so we've been kind of doing a little bit of a survey to see what is the optimal length of those videos if you're just going to blast them out on social media. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'll give you like stages. So optimally, in 5 seconds, you can say everything you want to. That's not obviously realistic, but if that can be like the main goal, is like, how do I sum this up into like 5 seconds that people can't skip? And just for insight on that too, you'll even notice that some YouTube ads are 5-second spots. There's a reason for that, is that they're unskippable, and that's if you can say a message within that short period of time that's going to resonate, then you're going to catch way more people and your message is going to be heard. Generally, if you can have something that's kind of 30 to 60 seconds, you're probably more likely to get people to stay on for that long. Once you kind of get into 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, you're probably going to see that video, even if someone's engaged in it, there's a good chance you might see people drop off after a couple of minutes, especially if it's a Facebook video or an Instagram. Well, actually, I don't even know if Instagram lets you go that long. But yeah, like on a Facebook video, you'll probably see in the video views that, and part of that is just because people they don't generally just like sit down the way you would to like watch a movie, right? The whole action is just to kind of scroll through and quickly digest things. So something that becomes too long, unless you're really, really invested in it, you're probably going to either say, that was neat, and I'll keep going, or have the intent of like, okay, I'm going to actually invest my time and watch this, but later. And then you might forget about the later. So usually if you have kind of that 30 to 60 second clip, but the click through will take you to the more information where you could also have the full video, for example, then what you're doing is you're just doing enough to get people interested. And then if they're interested, they'll come to your website or click through to watch the full video if it's on your YouTube page or whatever it is as well. That's just one thing. But yeah, I would say in general, first 5 seconds, you want to try to get someone hooked, whether you can say your full message or not. And then the next 30 to 60 seconds is what you've got to probably sell a message that people who are interested are going to pay attention to. And then anything after that, it's kind of like the wish list, really getting into details of things.
Perfect. That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Now let's give a couple more minutes if anyone else wants to. Perfect. I think that's good then. I'm just going to stop the recording portion and we can just go into the roundtable.